Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Saudara-saudara, kali ini kita akan melakukan sebuah obrolan, perbincangan tentang apa yang terjadi di Ukraina, antara Rusia dengan Ukraina, dan kita sudah kedatangan seorang yang mulia, Duta Besar Rusia Untuk Indonesia, Ibu Lyudmila Vorobieva. Selamat datang, Bu.
Terima kasih.
Ibu Lyudmila ini juga pernah datang ke perpustakaan saya, ke library, beberapa tahun yang lalu, dan kita berbincang tentang waktu itu di awal pandemi, tentang COVID-19 dan juga vaksinasi dan sebagainya, serta hubungan Indonesia dengan Rusia. Sebagaimana kita ketahui, memang hubungan Indonesia dengan Rusia sudah sangat lama sekali, dan kita mempunyai hubungan yang juga sangat erat di masa-masa tertentu, dan sekarang kita tetap mempunyai hubungan diplomatik yang sudah cukup panjang, sekitar 72 tahun. 72 years, if I'm not mistaken. So,
yes, that's true.
I've been following Your Excellency's statement on the media regarding Russia's position vis-a-vis NATO and all diplomatic efforts made to ensure peace and stability in the region. So Your Excellency seemed to be bold in affirming Russia's unwillingness to declare war, and President Putin once also said that Ukrainians are Russia's families. Yet it surprised me that a week ago the Russian parliament granted President Putin unanimous approval to deploy force abroad, and in this case is Ukraine. So, well, I also take an important note that President Putin clearly stated that this is not a war against Ukrainian, but it is special military operation with military objects as targets. So, if I'm not mistaken, this is the exact word: Russia will fight for demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. But it is unfortunate that based on what I read and what I see in the media today, collateral damages are inevitable, such as its impact to public facilities like housings, and the death toll also counted. So I wonder to hear from Your Excellencies on what sort of situation that forced Russia to alter and stance towards Ukraine, in which I think it has significantly changed the global and regional political constellation today. And also, why do you think, Your Excellency, that the special military operation is necessary? Has diplomacy failed? Please.
Well, that's not one question. Of course, that's a very wide range of questions. But of course, they're all interrelated, because didn't start on the 24th of February when our president decided to conduct this military operation. And he's absolutely right. It's not a war. We're not conducting a war against Ukrainians, because Ukrainians are our brothers and sisters. I'm saying it in full conviction, and as I was born in Kiev. I'm not Ukrainian. Yes, I'm Russian. My father, my late father, grew up in Ukraine. He was born in Kharkov. My grandparents are buried in Kiev. Their graves are there. So I have still relatives in Ukraine, distant relatives, but some of the family is there. So it's just to highlight that I'm one of those Russians who have very close relations with Ukraine, and there are millions of Russians and millions of Ukrainians that have close relations with Russians. So we see Ukrainian people as our brothers and sisters. But for the last 8 years, the West, the collective West, led by the US, was doing its best so to say, to turn Ukraine into a anti-Russian project, as our president said, an anti-Russia.
Right.
And it really hurt for all Russians to see what was going on for 8 years in Ukraine. Actually, it started...
For example, Excellency?
I will tell you.
Yeah.
In 2014, as you know, there was a
Yes.
change of regime in Ukraine. An illegitimate coup d'etat was conducted, a very bloody one actually. A lot of
Yanukovych to Poroshenko.
To Poroshenko. It was supported by the West. Where was their democratic and human right protection stance at that time? You know, we in Russia, we all know what happened in 2014, but the Western media never reported it. For instance, do you know what happened in Odessa when 38 people were burned alive? They were peaceful demonstrators who didn't want this new, very Russophobic regime coming to power. They were just peacefully protesting. The neo-Nazi groups came in. They blocked them in a trade union building and they burned them alive.
In Odessa?
In Odessa, 38 people died.
Right.
And no one was punished. No criminals were persecuted. So that's just an illustration. The third thing that this very Russophobic and very pro-Western government did, they tried to suppress everything Russian. How can you do it in Ukraine where 40% of population think of themselves as ethnic Russian, speak Russian language, they use it in everyday life.
Right.
Even government officials in Ukraine use Russian language.
Yes.
I remember very well after 2014 when the parliament of Ukraine was debating a law to ban Russian language as an official language in Ukraine. You know what language they were using? They were actually speaking in Russian in their debates. So it became dangerous in Ukraine to speak Russian. And I'm not speaking only about Donetsk or Lugansk. Even in the streets of Kiev you could have been beaten, or you could have been thrown paint in your face because you were speaking Russian. Imagine if you ban, say, French in Belgium, French language in Belgium, what will be the reaction of the population? Or, as our Minister of Foreign Affairs said, English in Ireland, or Javanese in Indonesia? Impossible. So, three predominantly Russian-populated regions in Ukraine protested. They didn't want this anti-phobic government to stay, that they didn't support, they didn't elect, because it was a coup d'etat. So it was Crimea, and you know what happened to Crimea, it rejoined Russia. So that's the end of the story. It's part of Russia. But at that time, Donetsk and Lugansk, they proclaimed they proclaimed independence. At that time, we didn't recognize the independence of these two regions, but the Ukrainian government chose to send army to suppress these two regions. Okay, where was the West? While Ukrainian army was killing people there. Their own people, because at that time it was part of Ukraine, and we recognized these regions as a part of Ukraine. Moreover, we were initiated the Minsk agreement to solve this problem inside Ukraine. Because it was clearly a civil war, you know, when the government sends troops to kill a part of the population, it's a domestic conflict. So we urged the leadership of Donetsk and Lugansk to sit together with the Kiev government and to sign the Minsk agreement in 2014-2015 to find a clear way to solve this situation inside Ukraine.
Right.
As you know, the agreements were signed,
Yeah.
but Kiev did not commit. They were supported. Actually, Western countries were they guaranteed these agreements.
It was in
2014 and 2015.
15, yeah.
So now, for 8 years, we've been pushing Kiev to commit to these agreements, to fulfill these agreements. And there was a very clear roadmap how to solve the situation. And of course, to retrieve all the armaments from the line of separation or the borders, to stop the shelling and the bombing, because Ukrainian army was shelling, bombing heavily the cities of Donetsk and Lugansk, killing thousands of people. There are different numbers. The lowest estimate is 2,500 people killed in these 8 years. The highest number I've heard is from 14 to 16,000. But in any case, that means that during these 8 years, every day people were dying in Donetsk and Lugansk. Where was the Western media? Now they're, you know, shedding these tears about Ukrainians. Why they were not shedding tears about people in Donetsk and Lugansk? You know, for me, for instance, did you hear there are very vivid symbols of these atrocities performed by Ukrainians? For instance, have you heard about the memorial called Alley of Angels in Donetsk? No, I'm sure no, because it was never reported in the media. These are graves of children, more than 100 children that died in Donetsk and Lugansk. Why didn't the media report on this violation of human rights? Because the main right of a human being is the right to live. So for 8 years we were trying to find political solution to this crisis. Right. But we were always blamed that we don't fulfill the Minsk agreement. We're not part of the Minsk agreements. It was Kiev who was not, the government in Kiev who did not fulfill this agreement. So 8 years. During this 8 years, meanwhile, the West was pumping arms into Ukraine, training their army, supporting the neo-Nazi ideology that became very widespread in Ukraine. Also, it is, you know, absolutely unthinkable. You know that Nazi ideology, which was adopted by the Germans by Hitler before World War II, and which led actually to World War II, it's banned in Europe.
Right.
It's illegal. But in Ukraine it was supported, and the West has turned a blind eye to what was happening in Ukraine, because what now we understand very clearly is their intention was to turn Ukraine into an anti-Russian project, a political and even military instrument to attack Russia.
But the neo-Nazi ideology that you mentioned, Excellency, what is, for example, the manifestation of that in Ukraine?
Very, very simple, you know. For Hitler and for Nazis and for some of the, I'm not telling about the Ukrainian people at large, but these neo-Nazi groups, they're people and they're subhumans. So not all people are not equal like God created them. There are some races that are superior. In the times of the Nazi Germany, it was Germans who were superior, and there were some races that were not quite human. It was Jews, of course, and it was Slavic people like Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians. For the superior races, it was okay to kill the subhumans. Same ideas in Ukraine. Ukrainians are superior, Russians are subhumans. It's okay that they could be beaten up or killed. You know, of course Nazi ideology is it's a more complicated thing, but during the German but to put it in a nutshell, they are superior races of human beings, and they are inferior, and it's okay to kill the inferior races. Absolutely inhuman and absolutely intolerable. it cannot be supported. Why did the West?
So this is especially in the case of Donetsk and Lugansk.
Absolutely. Not only the Ukrainian army was there, but also they were pushing this. They are called the nationalistic battalions, like Azov, Aidar. Probably you've heard these names, and they were. Actually, these were the groups that performed the more atrocities in Lugansk and Donetsk. So for 8 years, Ukraine was being turned by the West into an anti-Russian project, like our president said, like anti-Russia. And for us in Russia, it really hurt to see that, because, you know, these are same people like us. Like, you live in Jakarta, there are people in Yogyakarta, why should there be enemies?
Right.
So we couldn't understand this, why Ukrainians behave in this way. And we, for 8 years, we've been trying to find a diplomatic solution. But also, if you look back, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, you remember very well what happened, that the military alliance that the Soviet Union had, the Warsaw Pact, which was the counterbalance for NATO, was dissolved.
Yes.
And our then leadership, even Gorbachev, before the dissolution of the Soviet Union, he asked for guarantees that NATO will not expand. Because the Warsaw Pact is no more there, why should NATO expand?
Because no more Cold War.
No more Cold War, no more confrontation, no more communism ideology, gone. Why should there be any confrontation, and why should NATO expand? The Western leaders said, yes, of course, NATO will not expand. Our side said, okay, we sign an agreement. They said, no, you just believe our word.
I see. So there is no
written
agreements on that matter.
Because they said, believe us. We believed them. And they lied. Because from 1999 to 2020, NATO had 5 rounds of expansion, and it comes closer and closer to the border of the Russian Federation.
So Poland, Hungary,
Baltic states were the first. So we have a border with NATO countries, but as our president put it, the red lines for us that shouldn't be crossed is Ukraine becoming.
So it's like a buffer zone.
Because why? Very easy to understand. We have a long border with Ukraine. If NATO brings its military infrastructure to Ukraine, the missiles placed on the border between Russia and Ukraine will reach Moscow in 3 minutes.
Right.
It's not we.
So it's like becoming a threat.
Of course, it's a real threat to our security concerns.
Right.
And it's not we that were bringing missiles to the border of the United States, to Mexico or Canada. No, it's NATO that was bringing its military infrastructure closer and closer to. We were telling that to our Western partners for many years. They preferred not to hear. Just words, 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 words. And NATO continued to expand. Okay, in December this year, we asked US and NATO for written security guarantees for Russia. After it was declared that Ukraine will become part of NATO sooner or later. Okay, they're saying maybe not tomorrow, the day after tomorrow. When? So it's a direct threat against the Russian Federation. We even drafted an agreement on security guarantees in Europe and handed it over to NATO and the US.
Right.
Actually, we extended a hand. They were response, but our concerns were not taken into consideration. So the situation became really unbearable. At the same time, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, declared that Ukraine is prepared to have nuclear arms. And from the West also nothing, no negative reaction. How can that be? There's a non-proliferation regime. There are treaties, international treaties signed. Also no reaction. It's okay for Ukraine to have, and they have the potential. You know, Ukraine is a developed country. They have the intellectual potential, they have the industrial potential, they have the natural resources to do so. It's quite tangible. It's not just words. They could do that.
Right.
And at the same time, the Ukrainian army launched a very heavy offensive on Donetsk and Lugansk. Started shelling again, shelling civilian infrastructure, homes, hospitals, schools. The images that you can see now a lot in the Western media, it's really, you know, the information war is something terrible. They use the images of buildings in Donetsk and Lugansk destroyed by the Ukrainian army.
Really?
Yeah, there's a lot of fakes, as if it were buildings in Ukraine destroyed by the Russian, because it's very hard.
No, but Excellency, several buildings that I saw.
Several buildings, yes, and
like in Kharkiv.
several buildings, okay, but how can you say, is it in Kharkiv or not? Do you know Kharkiv very well?
Yeah, I've been. Kiev also.
Kiev, okay, but I will tell you also the story. So our decision, the president has taken the decision that, you know, we recognize the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk. We signed the Treaty on Amity and Cooperation, which provides for military assistance to these two regions. And our president has taken the decision to help them, to stop the war. Ministry of Defense has stated many times, we are not targeting civilians, we are not targeting civilian infrastructure. You remember how Americans behaved in their invasions of other countries?
Yes, of course.
Carpet bombings, destroying everything, like in Yugoslavia, and then troops rolling in. No, it's not what we're doing. As I love the way one of the military experts put it, where our army is tiptoeing into Ukraine, trying to avoid casualties among civilians as much as we can. We destroyed the military infrastructure, military installations, and in Kiev we targeted the two centers of data, which actually was the center of disseminating fakes. But we told in advance the civilian population who live near the centers to get into shelters.
I see.
In every city that is surrounded by the Russian troops, there were leaving humanitarian passages for civilians to be able to get out. Unfortunately, the Ukrainians themselves are preventing civilians from leaving the cities. They are using these Nazi groups also to threaten the civilians and to prevent them from leaving the cities. They're also using civilians as a human shield. Meanwhile, we're engaging in talks with Ukraine because every life is precious, of course.
Yes.
So the sooner the targets that we have set will be reached, either by military, but we prefer, of course, by diplomatic way, the better for everyone. So there were 2 rounds of talks. The third one will be soon, I think, early next week.
This one is in the border of Belarus.
Yes, Belarus. And I don't know the details, they are not disclosed, but according to what our head of delegation told, there are some points that have been identified that can be the basis for further compromise and solution. for this conflict. So that's the situation right now.
Right. How about the sanctions against Russia now? What is the impact to the citizens and to the economy of Russia especially?
You know, the response of the West is something hysterical, don't you think? It's something absolutely abnormal and out of proportion, because, you know, they're saying that, okay, we have launched the biggest armed conflict since World War II. Come on, who is talking? What about Yugoslavia, bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999? For 78 days they were bombing cities, civilians, and they were bombing with depleted uranium bombs, which cause cancer in the long run. Not only death and destruction, but also cancer for those who survived in the long run. 78 days.
And Iraq, of course.
Iraq.
Afghanistan.
Libya. Completely destroyed. It was a prosperous country. They tried to do it in Syria. 20 years in Afghanistan. What about hundreds of thousands of people killed by United States and NATO in these countries? Where's the response of the international community? Where the Israeli bombing Palestine? Americans killing an Iranian general in Iraq? It's okay?
Yeah, of course not.
Yeah, but it seems that that's okay. I'm not saying that we want to use the same ways, but the response is absolutely abnormal, on the hysterical, I would say. And if you ask me why, I will tell you why is this response hysterical. Do you want to ask me?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So why is the response? Then I'll go to the sanctions. Why is the response so hysterical? Because what we see now is as you said in your introduction, the core world structure is changing. Because now it is absolutely evident that the world is not a unipolar place anymore.
Right.
And there are new centers of power emerging. China, of course, Russia, ASEAN, including Indonesia, Latin American countries, South Africa, Arab countries. And the West is losing its dominance over the world. That's what they cannot agree, that these people who were masters of the world for more than 500 years, they are now losing their influence. Okay, they're strong, of course, we are not saying anything, but eventually the world will not remain the same, and that's what we are witnessing now. So this hysterical reaction comes from this fear to lose the dominance. So, and they're used to maintain this dominance by force. You know, I read the recent research and recent discussion in Indonesia about the Dutch actions in Indonesia in 1945, 1949. Was that not also an effort to maintain their dominance by force? All the atrocities that they performed?
Yes, of course.
Of course. So basically it's the same thing. But they don't dare to go with war or to launch a full-scale war with Russia, and we don't want it. God forbid, it will be suicide for the whole world. So they are just trying to strangle us economically. Okay, a lot of hypocrisy also, because they usually, what they said before, it's not the first time that they are applying sanctions to another country. We're not the first. That the aim of the sanction is to make the government change the policy. Okay, did it work anywhere in the world? Iran? North Korea? Russia? We're under sanctions from 2014. It didn't destroy our economy. I'm not saying that the sanctions will not hurt. They will, of course. But I'm sure that our country is very resilient, you know. Our economy is quite resilient. I really hope that, you know, that the policies that our government is conducting, they will help our population, our economy to survive. You know, during the Soviet time, Soviet Union was under sanctions for 70 years. It didn't prevent Soviet Union from being a great power. Right. So, and I also hope that this hysterical reaction, there will be soon realization that there should be something more than just a hysterical reaction. They should look at realities. And Russia cannot be isolated, and it is not isolated. Not actually many countries joined the sanctions against Russia, and we have countries that are still willing to do business with us, to cooperate with us. Of course, China, they didn't support the sanctions, and they're not going to do that. So what is really terrible, I think, it's that in fact these sanctions, and now they're just telling it in an open way, it's not to make the government to change its policies, it's to suffocate Russia and Russian people. What's that? And these sanctions are not only economical, but our sportsmen are prevented from joining the, our Paralympics are now thrown out of the Olympic Games.
World Cup.
What is this? Where are the human rights or anything? You know, when even there are very funny things like our cats have been banned from joining international competition.
The grey cat.
Yeah. That's absurd, of course. I really hope that our Western partners will come to their senses, because so far they just lost control, you know, over their own.
That's why you call it hysterical.
It's absolutely hysterical, of course.
How about the nuclear war threat?
Well, that's in the mind of our Western partners, actually, because Biden, you remember the words of Biden? He said that if it were not for economical sanctions, then the other option would be World War III. Come on, is he serious? You know, even thinking about World War III, World War III will be a nuclear war. No one will, there will be no victory for anyone. And that's not our intention in any way.
It's a zero-sum game. Yeah.
It's a zero-sum game, absolutely. And I can tell you, if I'm quite sure it's my personal opinion, yeah, that if we didn't have nuclear weapons, and the nuclear weapons we have, it's for defense, it's not for attack, we would have shared the fate of Yugoslavia and Serbia. So this is to deter any aggression from our Western partners.
So you don't think that's going to be any further than the spatial military operation?
If it depends on Russia, there will be no war, I can assure you. You know, you know, you are very familiar with the history of Russia.
Yes,
I know.
Of course.
I read some interesting facts recently that in our history we were, well, for the last 1,000 years, we were 500 years in war. But most of the wars, we didn't start them. We finished them, actually. We put an end to it, including the last two world wars. World War I started without Russia. We were pulled into it by the West. World War II started not by Russia, and before Russia was involved, or Soviet Union at that time.
Yeah.
So, and this time it's also evident we are not trying to launch a war, a new war in Europe. We're trying to put an end to a war that has been going on for 8 years. Unfortunately, it's not information war, it's disinformation war that was launched against Russia didn't allow people in the world to know what was really happening. So our intention actually is to protect people of Donetsk and Donbass, to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, to make Ukraine neutral, and to protect our own security.
with this, we heard from the news, now there's around 45 kilometers a convoy of trucks, of soldiers, and it's already very near to Kiev. Yeah. What do you think is going to happen?
I'm not a military expert. I'm not from the Ministry of Defense. I cannot forecast how it will. I think a lot of will depend on the result of the talks again, because what I heard also from our delegation statement, that one of the topics is the ceasefire, actually, that are discussed during the. Of course, you know, as a diplomat, you know, there's a saying that when diplomats talk, the cannons are being mute. So, of course, we hope that these talks will bring good news, and this operation will come to an end quite soon.
So do you think, well, I mean, this is from outside. I know from history also that Ukraine is very important. Kiev is very important. And even the Kievan Rus also part of the very important history at the time in the 10th, 11th century. But do you think Ukraine, maybe without Donetsk and Lugansk, or?
Well, I believe that if and when the people of Ukraine will not be, you know, under pressure and will have the free choice, they will decide whether, what kind of government they want, whether they want Lugansk and Donetsk, and the people of Lugansk and Donetsk, whether they would like to go back to a new Ukraine, so to say. It's up to the people who live there. Our president was very clear: we are not occupying Ukraine, and our aim is not the actually change of regime per se. It's just that we want to see this anti-Russian bastion at our borders.
Yes. Yeah,
and it's not normal. It's a situation that has not been normal for 8 years in many aspects. Of course, there's a war that was going on for 8 years, and people were dying every day. And seeing Ukrainians turned into our enemies was also absolutely not normal. It couldn't have lasted forever.
Right. Or maybe for the sake of the audience knowledge, Excellency, what is the difference between Russian and Ukrainian?
From my point of view, no difference.
No difference. Yeah.
We have a slight difference in language, but traditions, religion,
food, even
food. You know, we all like borscht. Of course,
borscht.
There are some subtle differences between the Ukrainian borscht and the Moscow borscht, but only real, you know, food lovers can tell this difference. We all, you know, we have so many Ukrainian restaurants in Moscow. I can tell there were never any animosity from Russians towards Ukrainians. As I told you, there were so many Ukrainian restaurants in Moscow all these years. I'm not sure there were Russian restaurants in Ukraine anymore.
And you have also like other tradition, the dance almost the same, and
yes,
matroshka.
There is a slight difference, but it's non-essential differences. It's of course every nation has its own cultural traditions, but the difference is not that big between Russians and Ukrainians.
Yes. So this is another topic, Excellency. Like 5 days ago, if I'm not mistaken, the UN Security Council had a special meeting on the situation in Ukraine and Russia and vetoes. And then the UN General Assembly at the time has approved the resolution which demand Russia to withdraw from military forces from the territory of Ukraine. What do you think about that?
Well, of course we're not happy with that. But General Assembly resolution is not non-binding, as
non-binding,
you know. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you as an ordinary person, okay? Of course, it's very natural for people when they hear war.
Right.
The first reaction is it's a tragedy. It's terrible. You need to stop it as soon as possible. It's very normal, because a normal person doesn't want war. Who would want war? Only a bloodthirsty maniac or something like that. No one wants war. So it's when people, you know, be it Indonesia or in other parts of the world, they say, okay, you need to stop the war as soon as possible. I mean, in an ordinary sense, it's very understandable. But there are cases when you can stop something, a bigger war, by having a smaller military operation. Because what we're trying to do actually to prevent a bigger peril from happening. And of course there is also, we should take that into consideration, that there is a huge information war launched against Russia. Even before the Ukrainian event started, do you remember anything bad happening in the world? Russia is behind. Be it hacker attacks, no evidence, interference into election of the American president. I wish we would be so powerful to, you know, just to elect the American president. Even interference in Indonesia, which is absolutely not true, of course. Anywhere in the world, we were behind. Chemical attacks in Syria, we were behind. What also absurd accusation? We were trying to poison one of our opposition activists with chemical weapons. Also absolutely absurd, because if you think about it, chemical weapons are weapons of mass destruction. Why would you want to poison a single person by a weapon of mass? And he was not poisoned, actually. He lives in. So all this, you know, absurd accusations without any evidence. You remember they even used this phrase, highly likely. It is highly likely. No evidence, just highly likely. And you should believe it, you know, because it's highly likely, because the West is telling you. So, of course, this disinformation campaign, it doesn't help people or nations who are, you know, far away from the European region, and to understand what is really happening. And of course the West, it's not a secret, they're putting a lot of pressure on governments of every single country in the world to support their position. So that what's happening. But even in this situation, there are countries that do understand and do not support this kind. And of course China, first of all. But some ASEAN countries didn't support that. Unfortunately, Indonesia did, but, well, that's your right. So you see, the international community shouldn't react on emotions. There should be real facts and analysis of what is really happening.
So following the situation in Ukraine, many countries such those in European Union, United States, Canada have taken significant measures such as economic sanctions targeted to Russia, as I mentioned before. So considering Russia's condition as a producer of 10% of global oil and supplies 40% Europe's gas, how does Russia respond to this sanction? I mean, economically, you answer a bit, but I would like to dig more on this sanction. Of course, I believe that President Putin has made a very rigid calculations on the action, including you also maybe expect these consequences. How do you think this is? Of course, you said it will hurt Russia, but also what do you think about the global economy?
Oh, it will hurt the global economy as well. No doubts. That's why I'm saying that the reaction is hysterical, because you know what is happening to the oil prices and gas prices. They're just rocketing up. And of course it will affect the global economy, and you know, we also are responding to some of the sanctions. For instance, did you know that the Americans were using Russian engines for their space programs?
Rocket engines.
Yeah, so no, we will not supply anymore. So as the head of our agency, space agency, put it, he joked that now they will be flying on their brooms. So, it's not what we wish for. You know, Russia is a part of the global economy, and of course we would like to see, you know, no turbulence on that. But it's the choice that the West has made. It's not our choice. So if they want to pay for the gas $2,000, that's their choice. We're supplying, we're committed to our obligations. We're supplying gas to China, for instance. So yes, it will affect the global economy, but it's not our choice. It's the choice of the West.
Right.
So they will have to live with this.
And maybe my last question, Excellency, it's about, I think several days ago, there was a trending topic also in Twitter about Chechnya, the Chechen fighters, because Chechen used to be a bit hostile to the central government at the time, early President Putin's administration. But now we show on the video that they're eager to fight for Russia, and they are Muslim, so some of the Indonesian also have sympathy on the Chechen, the Chechnya. I monitored in the comments in the Twitter. What do you think? I mean,
well, it's a very long story. It was a long time ago when Chechnya was hostile to Russia. Not anymore.
Yes, of course.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
And of course, what happened in the 90s, it's also, there were a lot of interference from outside. You know Russia, Fadli, we have this tradition of living together with Muslims. 20% of our population are Muslims, and they're not migrants.
Yes.
They're people who were living in Russia for centuries, like Tatars, like Chechens, other Muslim...
in Dagestan.
Yeah, Dagestan, other Muslim nations. We have migrants also, but most of our Muslim population, they are native Russian citizens, I would say, Russian nationals. So yes, Chechnya supports the policy of President Putin very much. The present leader of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, he told so very blatantly, and some of the armed forces from Chechnya, yes, Muslims, they have no how to say, reserves to go to Ukraine. Actually, what I would also say, what the troops that are used in our military operation are professionals.
Yes.
They are not just, how do you say it in English, they are not just these young boys who serve for 1 year and then they go back. This kind of...
not the reserve.
Not the reserve, not those who are under conscript, I think that is called.
Right.
Yeah, so these are just professionals, professional army, not the ordinary, say, young boys who, because in Russia we have this obligatory military service for 1 year. So if you're 18 and if you're not a student of a university, then you go and serve your country for 1 year in the army. But this category of military personnel is not used in the operation in Ukraine. Only professionals. Only professionals.
The question is about the Islamophobia that's now in the global context, so many Islamophobic in certain countries, you know. And I know that in Russia, they have a very peaceful coexistence or family of the religions there.
Yes, that's absolutely true. You know, for centuries we've been living together, especially in Tatarstan. There's so many mixed marriages. In Chechnya as well. We have many Muslims in Moscow. You know that we have the biggest mosque in Europe that was inaugurated by President
I've been
Putin.
there.
Yeah, it's in the center of Moscow. And among people, ordinary people, there is no animosity. Even well, in our embassy we had a diplomat. He left to Moscow, a counselor. He was from Tatarstan, a Muslim, but he was married to a Russian lady, and he's still married to a Russian lady.
Yes.
Yeah, they left to Moscow. They had two daughters, and what he's been telling me, and she's a Russian Orthodox. So when the children were about to be born, they decided if it was a boy, he will be a Muslim. If a girl, Russian Orthodox. Two girls. Now they're trying for a boy.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Excellency, for the discussion. And I think I know you're also very busy, and I hope that the situation is going to be better soon, and it will be back to normal in few days or weeks, maybe, yeah, and months. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Demikian saudara-saudara percakapan saya dengan Ibu Lyudmila yang tadi telah menjelaskan latar belakang, sejarah, budaya, dan termasuk konflik yang terjadi sejak 8 tahun yang lalu di wilayah perbatasan Donetsk dan Lugansk yang memang sudah terjadi sejak 8 tahun lalu, dan ini yang menurut beliau menjadi salah satu trigger atau penyebab apa yang sedang terjadi sekarang ini. Dan Ibu Lyudmila juga menjelaskan tentang posisi Rusia dan menghadapi berbagai macam berita ada selama konflik ini. Beliau mengatakan bahwa tidak ada intensi untuk menduduki Ukraina, kecuali proses yang telah tadi disebutkan, terutama untuk menjadikan Ukraina itu tidak Rusofobik, ya, atau fobia terhadap Rusia, yang menurut beliau terjadi belakangan ini. Dan ini merupakan salah satu yang saya kira bisa menjadi bagian dari informasi yang bisa kita terima sehingga lebih seimbang ke depan. Mudah-mudahan apa yang terjadi sekarang ini di Ukraina bisa segera ada penyelesaian secara diplomatik, karena pembicaraan sudah terjadi 2 kali dan kita berharap tidak banyak korban, terutama dari masyarakat sipil. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.